So we're going to read today. I'm just getting home, and I know I said I would have this video posted by 6, so I got like 15 minutes to get it on and popping. I just wanted to talk with you guys a little bit about motif. I wanted to review motif again. So some of you for first period, you did the quiz. Second and fourth period, for those of you who are on second and fourth period who are not watching, you didn't have the quiz, but essentially the quiz was asking to read one of Jacqueline Woodson's poems and to come up with a motif. And many of you in that poem Lullaby, so everybody look at that poem Lullaby. I think it's on page 58. So take a second, turn to page 58 and look at the poem Lullaby. And let's talk about motif. So many of you said that the crickets was the motif. And in this poem, she mentions crickets like twice. But one of the things that I want you guys to remember about motif is there have to be three elements in order for a motif to be present. Okay? The first element is that it has to be something that is repeated. And I think the place where you guys went wrong is that you were thinking about the crickets being repeated twice in the poem Lullaby. But you have to remember, for motif, the image or the symbol or the situation or the color has to be repeated over the course of the text. So in Lullaby, crickets would not be a motif because that's not really an image that we continue to see over the course of the text. So remember, the very first element of motif, and I'm going to write these down, is that the image has to be repeated. Okay? So I want you to remember that. We're talking about three things that have to be present in order for something to be considered a motif. And so that first thing is that the image has to be repeated. And I'm going to draw the sign of this arrow, okay, over the course of the story. So you're not just thinking about one poem when you're thinking about motif. And I think, Ryan, this is what you were struggling with when we talked during second period. In order for motif to be present, you need three elements. And the first element is that that image, that situation, that color, that object, that symbol has to be repeated over the course of the text. Okay? The second thing that has to be present, if there's a motif, is that it has to be something that is significant to the story, not just the poem. Okay? It has to be significant to the story. So if we're going back to that poem Lullaby, think of it this way. If you remove the crickets from that poem, does the story go on? And that's how you have to think about motif. So motif is so significant that if you remove it from the story, it's really going to change sort of the feel and what's important about the story. So that's the second element that has to be present if a motif, or if a symbol, an image, a situation is considered a motif. So the first thing is that that image or symbol or color or situation or person has to be repeated throughout the story. Number two, it has to be significant to the story. So you guys are probably seeing this backwards. I don't know. I should have written it another way so you could see it the right way. But you know what I mean. Significant. It has to be significant to the story. So when you come across a motif, ask yourself, is this an image or a symbol or a situation or a person like that I've come across repeatedly as I've read these poems? Is this symbol or person or situation significant to the story? That is, if I remove that thing, Does the story still go on? If the story goes on and doesn't really change a lot or significantly, if you remove that thing, then it's probably not a motif. Okay? And the third and final is that it leads to theme. Ooh, I'm going in and out of focus. I'm not sure why my phone is doing that, but let's bring it back. Okay, there we go. So the third thing that has to be present is that that motif must lead to a theme. So those are the three things that are most important or that have to be present in order for something to be considered a motif. Number one, it's repeated not just in one poem, but over the course of the entire story. How many times is that image coming up? So for example, this notion of home or the motif of home is something that Woodson is constantly talking about throughout the story. She's always talking about South Carolina. She mentions Ohio. She mentions New York. She gives very vivid descriptions of home. And so this is an image that's repeated throughout the course of the story. If we think about the motif of home and we think about whether or not this is significant, if she takes out everything about South Carolina, New York, and Ohio, it's not going to be the same story. So that motif is definitely significant to how the story is told and how the story develops. And then finally, your motif must give you a hint or a clue or lead you to theme. Okay? So the motif of family definitely leads you to many themes. There are many themes in Brown Girl Dreaming around family. Family is everything. Family is always there for you. Families go through tragedies, but we still stick together. We see many, many themes that grow out of the motif of family or the motif of home. Okay, so let's do that one more time. When you're thinking about motif and you're trying to figure out, is this something I need to add to my tracker? Is the image or symbol or situation or person repeated consistently throughout the story, not just in one poem? Is this thing or object or symbol or person or situation significant to the story? Significant to the way the story unfolds or how the story is developed? And if you take that thing out, does the story continue to develop? So if Jacqueline Woodson never mentions anything about her family, about her grandparents, if she never mentions anything about South Carolina, Ohio, or New York, the story would change significantly. There would be no story. So we know, and then finally, a motif must lead to theme. So as you guys are thinking about motif and trying to figure out whether or not something that you've identified is a motif, think about those three things. If any one of those three elements is missing, then it's not a motif. Okay? So I'm only going to read a couple of the poems for tomorrow. I don't want to give them all away. Tomorrow is another independent reading day. And if you're watching this in first, second, or fourth period, we're trying something new when we have these independent reading lessons. And that is, we tried it in second and fourth. We didn't try it in first. Tomorrow we will try it in first. So I want to see how many people can do it. Come in tomorrow, take out your book, and immediately dive into the reading of Brown Girl. Okay, so I want to see how many people can earn those 5 extra credit points. Count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many people can earn those extra credit points by coming in tomorrow, immediately sitting down, taking out what you need, and beginning your reading? So tomorrow we're going to be reading pages 78 to 99. Okay, those are the pages for tomorrow, 78 to 99. So while you're reading tomorrow, you're going to be thinking about imagery. Okay? Now, who remembers the definition of imagery? Think about what the definition... Oh, I'm sorry. Scratch that. That's not for tomorrow. Tomorrow, we're still looking at motif. You're still thinking about what are the motif? What are the motifs? What are these images that are repeated throughout the story, are significant to the story? In other words, without them, there would be no story. And finally, lead to theme. Okay, that's what you're thinking about. Some of you guys struggled yesterday struggled actually today with your annotations. You weren't really clear about what to annotate. Guys, again, we're annotating in much the same way that we annotated chains. You may or may not have a new motif for every poem. There may be another motif that you have already identified earlier in the story that you see repeated in the new poems as this story unfolds. So just want you to keep that in mind. Not every poem is going to have a motif. Not every poem is going to have a new motif. Okay? Some of these poems are just verifying or just co-signing the fact that you have chosen a particular motif. So remember, you're tracking these motifs in your tracker. So for example, if you have the motif of home, let's say on your tracker you already have home and you have a piece of evidence and a possible theme that it moves towards, and that section of your tracker where it's asking you for page numbers, you can continue to add page numbers every time you see this motif of home come up. Every time you see this motif of family come up, you're just adding page numbers to those boxes. As long as you have one piece of evidence, because I'm asking you, I think in the tracker, it asks you for a piece of evidence. It asks you for a possible theme statement that this motif could lead to or that is developed by this motif. And then I think there's some place where you add pages. So even though you're giving me one theme and one piece of evidence, you can still collect page numbers every time you see this motif of home or family or any of the other motifs that you come up with mentioned, or as they are revealed, you can add those extra page numbers. So I think I'm going to read The Blanket, and I'm going to read one other. So join me on page 78, won't you? And as we're reading The Blanket, your book should be out, and you should be annotating and gisting for motifs that come up anew, and also motifs that have already come up for you and are already on your tracker. Remember, just a little side note commercial, that exit ticket should be shared or turned in on the Google Drive. For those of you who did not turn it in on time, I'm going to check and make sure that my message notification went to parents. Make sure that that's working. So if you didn't finish that exit ticket, go in and finish that and make sure that you turn it in. And number 2, you should have at least 2 motifs on your tracker. Actually 3, because you should have at least 1 from Friday last week and 2 from today's reading. Okay, and I'm going to be looking for that. And then finally, obviously, you're listening to the video. So let's go to page 78, The Blanket. The first time my mother goes to New York City it is only for a long weekend visit. Her kiss on our cheeks, as much as a promise as the excitement in her eyes. I'll bring you something back for each of you. It's Friday night, and the weekend ahead is already calling us to the Candy Lady's house. My hand in Daddy's. He doesn't know how to say no, my grandmother complains. And remember, Daddy is who? Daddy is their grandfather. That's what they call their grandfather. Remember, their mom and dad are not together anymore. So in that, you should be gisting, highlight, underline, or circle Daddy as I'm doing right now and put that's grandfather, because I don't want you to get that mixed up. So that's her grandfather, and that's what they refer to her grandfather as, Daddy. So I'll go back. So her mom is heading back to New York City for a long visit or a long weekend. It's Friday night, and the weekend ahead is already calling us to the Candy Lady's house. My hand in Daddy's or grandfather's. He doesn't know how to say no, my grandmother complains, but neither does she. Dresses and socks and ribbons, our hair pressed and curled. She calls my sister and me her baby girls, smiles proudly when the women say how pretty we are. So the first time my mother goes to New York City, we don't know to be sad. The weight of our grandparents' love like a blanket, with us beneath it, safe and warm. Let's read that again. So the first time my mother goes to New York City, we don't know how to be sad. The weight of our grandparents' love like a blanket, with us beneath it, safe and warm. Do we see a motif here? And what is it? I know that we definitely see imagery. So let's highlight, circle, or underline blanket. And what is blanket? What kind of figurative language are we seeing there? Can you give me that annotation there of what kind of simile she's using there with blanket? Our grandparents' love like a blanket, with us beneath it, safe and warm. So I'm going to go ahead and give you that one, but I'm expecting to see this annotation in your books tomorrow. So that's a simile. She's comparing her grandparents' love to what? A blanket. That's a simile. And that's very, very good imagery. So you have this picture of your mind of her grandfather and grandmother really surrounding them with love, to the point where it feels like a blanket, a nice warm blanket that they're underneath. Really nice imagery there, guys. You should definitely have that piece of annotation. You should also annotate that daddy is grandfather. And I think it's significant that this is the first time that her mom is leaving them in South Carolina and heading up to New York City. So let's have something highlighted, underlined, and circled there. First time mom goes to New York. You should have that annotated. And then give me an annotation for how they feel about their mother going to New York. Okay? It's very clear how they feel in those lines after we learn that this is the first time her mother is going to New York. So I really want to see that highlighted, underlined, or circled, and then just it. Okay? So that's the blanket. Let's go on to page 80. Miss Bell and the Marchers. They look like regular people visiting our neighbor, Miss Bell. Foil-covered dishes held out in front of them as they arrived, some in pairs, some alone, some just little kids holding their mother's hands. If you didn't know, you'd think it was just an evening gathering, maybe church people heading into Miss Bell's house to talk about God. But when Miss Bell pulls her blinds closed, the people fill their dinner plates with food, their glasses with sweet tea, and gather to talk about marching. So let's stop there. Can you give me a highlight, circle, or a gist for that section, that paragraph we just read? Why are people coming to Miss Bell's house? Are they bringing food to Miss Bell's house? Or are they coming to Miss Bell's house to get food? Let me have an annotation there. I'm going to look for that tomorrow. If you didn't know, you'd think it was just an evening gathering, maybe church people heading into Miss Bell's house to talk about God. But when Miss Bell pulls her blinds closed, and we live in New York City, guys, so we know what blinds are. When she closes those blinds, the people fill their dinner plates with food, their glasses with sweet tea, and gather to talk about marching. Okay, so I should see an annotation or just there. I will be looking for that. Why are people coming to Miss Bell's house? Okay, let's continue. Bottom of page 80. And even though Miss Bell works for a white lady who said, "I will fire you in a minute if I ever see you on that line," Miss Bell knows that marching isn't the only thing she can do. So people now are starting to protest in the South, and they're marching and they're protesting and they're sitting in diners and refusing to leave. And many of the black people at that time were threatened by their white employers. And they said, as just like this woman, this white woman that Miss Bell works for says very clearly, if I see you marching, if I see you participating in a march, if I see you on that line, I will fire you in a minute. So I think you should do a gist there. On that line, what is she talking about? Give me a gist right there that indicates what on that line is referring to. So Miss Bell knows that marching isn't the only thing she can do. Knows that people fighting still need full bellies to think and safe places to gather. She knows the white lady isn't the only one who's watching, listening, waiting to end this fight. So she keeps the marchers' glasses full, adds more cornbread and potato salad to their plates, stands in the kitchen ready to slice lemon pound cake into generous pieces. And in the morning, she just before she pulls her uniform from the closet, she prays, God, please give me and those people marching another day. Amen. So this has a lot here. There's a lot to be gisted, but a very clear underlined circle or highlight with a gist should tell me why people are going to Miss Bell's house and how Miss Bell is helping or supporting the marchers. Okay, those are the gists that you should have for that poem, pages 80 and 81. And also, what is a motif? Do we see a motif that we've already talked about arise here? Okay, do we possibly see a different motif? Something that we haven't seen before. So I'm going to be asking you about that, but you should definitely have those gists. And let's see what time it is. Okay, it's 6:05, and I know that you guys are expecting this video to be up. But let's read Hair Night because there's a lot in Hair Night. And I just want you to read that and make sure that you get these gists and annotations done. Hair Night, guys, join me on page 83 for Hair Night. Saturday night smells of biscuits and burning hair. Supper done, and my grandmother has transformed the kitchen into a beauty shop. How many people can relate? Laid across the table is the hot comb, Dixie Peach hair grease, horsehair brush, parting stick, and one girl at a time. Jackie first, my sister says, our freshly washed hair damp and spiraling over toweled shoulders and pale cotton nightgowns. She opens her book onto the marked page, curls up in a chair pulled close to the wood-burning stove, bowl of peanuts in her lap. The words in her books are so small, I have to squint to see the letters. Hans Brinker, or The Silver Skates, The House at Pool Corner, Swiss Family Robinson, thick books, dog-eared from the handing down from neighbor to neighbor. My sister handles them gently, marks the pages with torn brown pieces of paper bag, wipes her hands before going beyond the hard-bound covers. Read to me, I say, my eyes and scalp already stinging from the tug of the brush through my hair. And while my grandmother sets the hot comb on the flame, heats it just enough to pull my tight curl straighter, my sister's voice wafts, that means to move, wafts over the kitchen, past the smell of hair and oil and flame, settles like a hand on my shoulder and holds me there. I want silver skates like Hans, a place on a desert island. I have never seen the ocean, but this too, I can imagine, blue water pouring over red dirt. As my sister reads, the pictures begin forming as though someone has turned on a television, lowered the sound, pulled it up close. Grainy black and white pictures come slowly at me, deep, infinite, remembered, on a bright December morning long ago. My sister's clear, soft voice opens up the world to me. I lean in, so hungry for it. Hold still now, my grandmother warns, so I can sit on my hands to keep my mind off my burning head and my whole body still. but the rest of me is already leaving. The rest of me is already gone. Woo! Okay, this is exciting. So a couple of things that I see definitely. One of the motifs that I say repeated from what we talked about yesterday is books. So go back to page 83 and put a little like symbol or arrow that connects that whole piece about the words in her books are so small I have to squint. Thick books. So here's a motif that is repeated from earlier, actually from today. We saw her love of books, this connection to books that she has with her sister reading to her. So that's already a motif that we're seeing more evidence of. So you can add page 83 if you've already said that books, reading, or education is a motif that we identified earlier today. Here's another page number that you can add because that motif is clearly represented in Hair Night. Guys, what's another motif that comes to mind? For me, as a Black woman who sat many, many, many Saturday nights in my grandmother's kitchen in North Carolina and got my hair straightened and had my grandmother tugging through my thick and woolly hair after it had been washed, this definitely is a motif that resonates with me, the motif of hair. Now, has Woodson talked about hair before? Okay, that's a question that I can give you guys tomorrow. So I already see two motifs here. One that has repeated even as early as earlier this morning when we read the poems that we read this morning, this notion of reading and books. And also, for me, hair comes up. So that's all for today. This is a pretty short session with me today. Brown Girl Dreaming, guys, I'm loving it. I just wanted to give you some time to remind you of your homework. Number one, watch my video. Number two, really spend some time on motif. Watch this video, guys, but also watch the video in my playlist on motif. I think that that will give you a little bit more insight on motif. And also make sure that you're filling out that tracker. I will be checking trackers tonight. I want to see at least 3 motifs, 1 from Friday, 2 from today in that tracker. And I want to see all of those exit tickets turned in. Okay, guys? Thanks for listening. Peace out.